The air was thick with choking smoke and the scent of seared flesh, assaulting every sense. Suddenly, a series of tremors-like seismic shocks shook the entire bunker. The concrete floor split, and the red emergency lights flickered wildly, like a heart trapped on the brink of life and death. Trill pressed a hand to his chest, feeling each vibration pulse through the Graxrs minds like a herd of panicked beasts then. Amid the chaos, a crackling static swept through the intercom. Andromeda 7 Command, this is Colonel Maya Ortega. ETA 18 hours. Hold your positions. That strange voice cut through the cacophony of agonized screams and hissing oxygen tanks, planting a fragile yet fierce spark of hope in every warrior's heart. 18 hours, could they make it? Or would they be buried in a tide of fire and blood before help arrived? No one knew. But from that instant, the journey from despair to pride had begun. The first blast. Every surface was marred by pitting and cracks, a testament to the prolonged siege. Pipes overhead groaned under pressure, and the distant hum of emergency generators rattled the backbone of the facility. Inside the underground bunker of Andromeda 7, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and stone dust. A deafening explosion tore through the silence, sending the first tremor that cracked the concrete walls, flickering rows of lights before plunging them into darkness. Dust billowed in the cramped space, clinging to the armor and gas masks of the local guards. A Vorton soldier, his scarred face quivering, pressed a trembling hand against the control panel, struggling to steady his movements and fire back a shell at the enemy. But even his automatic rifle betrayed him, its rounds veering off course as the shifting floor rattled, striking the wall and sending showers of sparks into the gloom. Every pulse of the blast reverberated through his bones, threatening to shatter his resolve. On the alarm board, red lights blinked in a staccato rhythm like a failing heartbeat. The wail of sirens echoed throughout the bunker, drowning out the screams of terrified civilians huddled in the safety rooms. Those skeletal forms, sir, rather, the flesh-clad shells of human beings shrunk back at the sound of the blast. A single stray shot ricocheted into the crowd of survivors, sending a ripple of panic through the packed hallways. The coppery tang of blood lingered in the air, mingling with the Grax bomb's acrid smoke, wrapping around every ragged breath, as if tearing at the lungs of every living creature inside. Their chitinous limbs clicked against the metal floor, a chilling prelude to the slaughter waiting around every corner. Above, Mirith Maloyan officer with thick, warm plumage lay prone, her hands gripping a plasma rifle. Once a gentle researcher, her pale arm shook violently as blood seeped from the wound in her shoulder. Her heart raced in conflicting rhythms, each beat echoing her fear as if three hearts were trying to escape her chest. She bit her lip to keep her pulse from accelerating further, but when another jolt shook the chamber, she was forced to pull the trigger. The plasma beam screeched, carving through the rock face, but it barely slowed the tide of GRA creatures pouring through the breach. Through the intercom, civilians cried out in desperate pleas. We can't hold out much longer." But the shrill blare of the alarm swallowed their words. The blast door quivered before shattering as a suicide bomb shot in from the adjacent hall, incinerating a stretch of corridor and igniting a wall of red flame. Trill the Maloyan elder watched his kin burn in an instant, his eyes wide with horror. He collapsed to his knees, hand trembling against his leg, as he fought back tears of despair and rage. Overhead, the distant drone of emergency speakers crackled, spitting fragmented instructions drowned by chaotic noise. A short distance away, Commander Zillah's gaunt blue skin slacked beneath his armor. Three hearts beating in unison stood statue still before the tactical display. The panel sputtered under the strain of corrupted data, offering nothing but blank coordinates and ominous silence where orders once flickered. The red markers circling each bunker waypoint faded to black. The defense grid had collapsed entirely. He could not speak. His hand shook as he pointed to the map, choking out a single broken word. "This. Cannot. This." His voice cracked like shattered glass, slicing through the taut air. The final glimmers of light danced across the vision of the remaining guards, who scrambled down the hallway to warn the other levels. The thunderous thud of their boots against the blood-slit concrete sounded like a death knell. Grax soldiers, towering and clad in armor-like skin, stormed in formation, wielding electroshock rifles that spat deadly bolts of blue. Each strike sent victims convulsing before they crumpled, their bodies leaving grotesque splatters of crimson and gore against the walls. There was no time for resistance. Gaps in the defense forced soldiers and civilians to huddle together, using chairs and tables as makeshift shields. The cacophony of anguish moans, mingled with prayers to any divine force that might save them, formed a symphony of agony and fear. Each pulse of the Grax bombs shattered the fragile remnants of hope. Yet in this darkest moment, a faint signal flickered to life. The command handset rang, displaying an off-world contact code. The screen briefly flashed Andromeda 7 command, before fading to a dim glow around the control buttons. It seemed that even in the depths of despair, a sliver of hope still knocked at the door. Two halves. Desperate situation. The bunker shook violently, like a drumbeat before a nightmare. Alarm lights flickered red like fresh blood, then blinked out, restoring the dense darkness of dust and acrid smoke. Soldiers and civilians' screams merged with the tense wail of sirens pulsing in urgent bursts. The cramped space barely allowed trembling footsteps, each tremor swallowing fragile hopes. On the bunker schematic display, defensive sectors changed color rapidly, green to yellow, yellow to red, then to black, signaling that Grax shells had breached every wall. Vorten guards, some burdened by heavy armor, others gasping from depleted oxygen, clung to metal struts to stay upright. They fired wildly at the entrance, but warped steel rails deflected plasma rounds back like a cold blue hurricane, tearing flesh on anything in its path. In the civilian compartment, the scene was a miniature hell. Dozens who had sought shelter were trapped behind sealed steel doors. They pounded and pleaded, "Open the doors, we can't endure this any longer." But only an echo of agony answered. No portal budged. Through the thick haze, faces smeared with mud and blood, eyes wide with abandonment, haunted every officer's heart. The medical alert horn blared a steady rhythm. A medic's voice crackled over the comms, choked with emotion. Emergency, over 200 critical injuries. Severe blood loss request. Access to medical cache and assistance in compartment B3. He coughed up blood, then ragged breathing remained. A forlorn prayer before the Grax onslaught. Commander Zilla stood motionless in the control room. His three red eyes reflected the map peppered with red dots, now glowing with lethal intensity. He gripped the observation window handle, holding his breath as each explosion rumbled beneath. Every jolt underscored the fragile lives of thousands under his command. A young officer knelt, sobbing. "We have no fallback. Grax fire has punched through the western barrier. Toxic gas floods the ducts. Oxygen will deplete in 2 minutes." Miri, the Maloyan officer, slumped over a console. Her warm feathers hung lifeless, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. Blood oozed from her shoulder as she struggled to extract a plasma shard lodged in her muscle. She trembled, attempting to relay orders. "Activate decontamination gas emitters. Seal all fire doors. We must hold compartment A." But the mic crackled only with despairing static. Trill the Maloyan elder hobbled forward on his staff, his fur bristling, eyes deep with visions of apocalypse. He yanked the console lever and issued the final command. "Shut down the primary air scrubbers. Divert the circulation to the emergency module." His voice cracked, each syllable a blade sinking into the hearts of all who listened. He knew the backup module would overload in minutes. The steel door to the civilian quarters hissed under Grax electroplasma fire. A violet beam scorched through the metal, vaporizing everything in its seam like a forge. Screams rose and fell, cut off by the drip-drip of secondary detonations in everyone's ears. Blood spattered the walls, charred flesh fell to the floor, sending soldiers vomiting. A group of young troops huddled near the entrance. They gripped rifles, legs shaking, eyes flickering between fear and fury. "We must counterattack," one urged. Another steadied himself. "Hold your positions. This trench is our only chance to survive." but Grax's marksman had already severed many lifelines the moment heads peered above the rail. Blood-splattered scopes, leaving crimson handprints. On the survival dashboard, casualty numbers jumped like a roller coaster graph. Bodies lay strewn, some charred black. White smoke rose from open wounds. Those still breathing could only pray for a miracle or wait for the rescue promised 18 hours ago. But 18 hours now felt like an eternity. Buried beneath relentless bombardment, the emergency alarm rang again, warning of 2 more Grax warheads primed to detonate. A blinding yellow flash seeped through cracks, sowing terror in every dark corner. Tremors tilted the bunker structure, control panels groaned, and metal joints snapped. In that paralyzing moment, Zilla clenched his fist, muttering, 90 seconds left. 90 seconds. Everyone stood statue, still, awaiting the decisive instant. When the bomb exploded, a shockwave hurled bodies backward, spraying blood in all directions. Horrified screams soared to their peak, mingling with the last breaths of those too slow to escape. Dust and debris filled the air. Flame and smoke billowed high, and the entire bunker was engulfed in a red-tinged night. Silence reigned for a fleeting moment before the second blast thundered through, shattering the final barrier and opening death's gate to the Grax horde to consume all that remained. 2 halves. The call for rescue. Red lights on the control panel flickered like a failing heart, merging with the static drone of the communication system as noise waves rebounded throughout the command module. Thick, suffocating coal dust and debris swirled through the cramped room, but his hands maintained a steady, relentless rhythm. Sweat soaked his forehead, each bead falling beside the console before evaporating in the hot smoke. There's a signal," Traven shouted, his voice choked with astonishment. Everyone spun around, eyes wide with hope. The crackling ceased, giving way to a crisp voice. "Andromeda 7 Command, this is Colonel Maya Ortega, Human Expeditionary Force. Hold your positions. We are closing in. ETA 18 hours. I repeat, 18 hours. Maintain all defensive perimeters." Applause broke out in the chamber. Miri leaned forward from her chair, blood still oozing from her shoulder wound. But she forgot the pain as the promise of rescue reached her ears. Trill closed his eyes, his plumage drifting as though catching a new wave of hope. He murmured, "Hope is the strongest weapon." But immediately, the young officer Kael's voice rang out. 18 hours? We only have 4 hours of oxygen." The room fell silent. The alarm horn blared, chilling everyone when they realized that span meant survival or death. Commander Zilla clenched his fist. "Every second counts," he said, his tone steel, hard. "We must optimize every resource. Miri, activate the oxygen recycling system. Traven, lock onto the rescue signal. Not a single bit of data can be lost." His voice echoed like a battle drum, stirring the cold air. Suddenly, the medical status display lit up. Casualties in compartment B3 spiked. Over 300 critical injuries, severe blood loss. In the mobile aid station, wooden cots were packed with people. A Dran medic fumbled with pain medication, her eyes alight with determination. "We cannot abandon anyone." She injected a bleeding Vorton, her hand trembling but her lips pressed together. The beeping of monitors sounded a rhythm, mixed with hacking coughs and moans. The smell of antiseptic mingled with charred flesh, assaulted some stomachs. Yet within the chaos, one could still sense the last embers of reason and resilience. Back at Command Center, Traven stabilized the link. The words, "Link stable," appeared on the screen. He nodded in satisfaction, then increased the transmission power. "Signal stable. They have received the bunker map and medical checkpoint locations. Orders to unlock the pharmacy and deploy mobile scrubbers have been sent." The clicking of switches sounded like the heartbeat of Allied forces restarting. An authorization message popped up. Opening reserve medical cache, increasing oxygen flow, activating secondary air scrubbers. Reinforcements will deliver an additional 3 tons of medical supplies. Hold your defense until we arrive." A shout of "Hold fast!" resounded, echoing through the room like a tidal wave. Debris, cracks, and fear that once dominated receded, making room for renewed conviction. Yet even that hope was laced with anxiety. Would 18 hours be enough? Or was it just a distant figure amid the ocean of blood? On the display, the bunker map revealed the reinforcements' approach. Green lines sharpened into view, tracing the escort ships and relief modules. Arrows labeled +3 tons med supplies and +500 oxygen tanks made every heart pound. They pictured the day they would emerge into light, the moment their cries would be answered. And that final minute would not be despair. In that instant, Miri looked at Zilla, her eyes glistening with determination. "If they arrive," she whispered, "we will avenge every life lost." Zilla nodded, jaw set. 17 hours, 59 minutes remaining. An unfamiliar alarm sounded, reporting a new development. A mobile support module has breached the northern defenses and is preparing to drop medical gear. Traven adjusted the map, the new arrow shining bright yellow. "They're close, 200 kilometers away." Then, a distant roar echoed, not a Grax bomb, but the thrust of incoming support ships. Alerts on the console flashed, playing a triumphant symphony of hope before transforming into a victorious anthem in the hearts of every warrior. The final message appeared. Rescue Force has entered the bombardment zone. Maintain all coordinates until touchdown. In the smoke-choked, sweltering chamber, officers stood and lifted their weapons skyward, not to fire, but to salute the sun. They had held on to faith amidst the Grax RS fury, and now Andromeda 7's greatest hope began to blossom. In that moment, flags were raised, weary hearts ignited anew, and every warrior braced for the stand against the Grax RS onslaught. The human assault. In low orbit above Andromeda 7, the drop pods blazed like lost stars, roaring through the night sky. When their outer casings snapped open, jets of plasma erupted, slicing through the poisoned atmosphere and shaking the ground with thunderous force. Each pod plunged down like a bullet from hell, gouging holes in the protective dome and hurling shards of metal across the frozen rock floor. A searing glow traced every footprint left in the claret dust. Inside the bunker, Vorten and Maloyan defenders huddled against cracked walls-only to be thrown off their feet by each pod's impact. Clanging metal, the terrified screams of civilians, and officers' urgent shouts merged into a chaotic symphony. A suffocating haze of dust and debris filled every corner, making each breath feel like swallowing a furnace that burned the lungs. Colonel Maya Ortega emerged from the lead pod, her slender frame calm and assured, eyes shining with steely confidence. Behind her stood 400 human soldiers equipped with modular rifles, electromagnetic disruptors, and drones armed with cluster grenades. Under the cold, green glow of tactical lights, they spoke no words, exchanging knowing looks that required no explanation. They were here to save lives and to make the Grax RS the victims. The Shadow Team's pod smashed through a secondary arch, rupturing the overhead ventilation ducts. 6 operatives spilled into the smoke-choked corridor, pistols snarling at the Grax sentries above. Plasma fire ripped flesh from bone. Enemy corpses exploded into glinting fragments. Grax laborers screamed in agony as they were cut down, collapsing in pools of their own blood. This was no firefight, it was an organized execution. Gore sprayed everywhere, drenching Ortega's armor and that of her squad. One Grax soldier staggered back with an ion arrow through his chest, viscera oozing like molten rubber as white vapor hissed from the wound. Other corpses lay shredded by the turret mounted on the pod's hatch. The echo of tearing flesh reverberated down the hallway, a haunting anthem of merciless, uncompromising war. From a nearby telepathy module, Miri and Trill detected waves of panic and rage in the Grax minds. Trill hunched forward, feathers bristling as he read their mounting fear and confusion. They relayed every projected position of incoming Grax patrols back to command, Each telepathic signal guided the humans like a phantom blade through the enemy's psyche, avoiding traps and striking without warning. Two small bulldozer siege fitted with thermic drills roused from pods behind the infantry, carving the concrete floor and cleaving the walls in half. The soulless machines ground Grax bodies into pulp, the creatures' faces contorted under the searing heat. Civilian miners, now wearing improvised armor, wielded gear wheels and springs as smoke bombs and laid traps in the Grax rear. A single tripwire sent entire squads tumbling unconscious. Ortega signaled the squads to disperse. Team A swept north to intercept. Team B sealed off the medical compartment, and Team C cleared the rail corridor leading to the power core. Each squad numbered only 60, but they moved like phantoms. Every nook and crevice was exploited. Their close-quarters combat expertise tested in 100 battles left. The Grax stunned before they were torn apart by the human executioners. Through their comms crackled an American battle anthem, "Who dares wins?" The slogan echoed in every headset, igniting camaraderie and stealing hearts. Rifles were raised high as voices roared the rallying cry. The human soldiers smiled grimly as they watched the Grax flail helplessly. They knew sacrifice was inevitable. The flames of combat leapt higher, proving once more that humanity never turns from death's door. When every corridor feeding into the main thoroughfare was secured, Ortega's troops hoisted a blood-splattered white and blue American flag above the bunker doorframe. They shouted, "Open the main hatch!" And inside, the door's release mechanism clicked in affirmation. The massive portal slid up to reveal the exhausted Vorton, Maloyan, and Dran defenders gone, disoriented and overjoyed. They had held out far longer than anyone believed possible, but now the bloodshed could pause. Reinforcements had arrived, and the real battle was only beginning. Spiritual allies, gasping for breath in an atmosphere thick with the stench of smoke and fresh blood, the defenders of Andromeda 7 realized that their deadliest weapon was neither plasma cannons nor armored drills, but the supernatural powers hidden deep within their minds. In the makeshift command room, Trill the Maloyan elder sat cross-legged on the blood-stained metal floor, eyes tightly shut and feathers bristling. He linked telepathically with Miri, Zilla, and the Dran officers over a private mind network, preparing Operation Mindstorm, a psychic assault on their foes. When Trill inhaled deeply, the very air seemed to contract. The mechanical clatter of the bunker's systems fell away until only the soldiers' ragged breathing and pounding hearts remained. In that sudden stillness, an invisible wave of energy rippled through the corridors. Myriad, the oxygen recycling console, stopped in her tracks as she sensed a torrent of Grax-RS thoughts. Raw terror, savage hunger, and almost ecstatic bloodlust. She immediately relayed their center of mass coordinates back to command, where Ortega and Zilla were poised to strike the enemy's blind spots. Lieutenant Kira Chinthi, sole human able to receive and amplify telepathic signals, strapped on her homemade neural sensor and pressed her palm against Trill's chest. Drawing in the glow of his focused will, she closed her eyes and pictured the Grax-RS minds as roiling shadows. Psychic currents, cold and acid-sharp, sliced through the enemy's mental shields. Then Chin broadcast back. Heavy tank units in Sector West are deserted. Dozens of Grax are massing to assault Corridor C4. They're quivering, consumed by fear. Instinctively, Guard Team A6, human soldiers, and 4 Dran officers slipped from cover and moved silently down the maintenance tunnel without signaling. They knew the Grax-RS fielded heavy armor and weapons, but now the enemy's morale was shattered. As Team A crept onto the concrete floor, the Grax clustered at the tunnel, mouth froze in place, eyes white with panic and screams rising in chaotic disarray. For the first time, none dared fire terror rooted them to the spot, limbs convulsing, blood splattering walls. Meanwhile, Trill maintained his telepathic link to Zilla Three-Hearted Vorton, commanderindering the twisted thoughts of the Grax Supreme Commander. Proclamations of doom, desolation, and the promise that reinforcements would never arrive before the gasworks exploded. Zilla's multiple hearts pounded with cold sweat, yet a bitter smile crept across his face. Shall we give them a taste of true despair? He fed back a defiant thought command to trigger the Maze Runner, protocollaring the Grax deeper into a trap. Amid the gray haze, the Dran warriors, normally non-combatants now, became mobile psychic transmitters. They glided through the rubble, each step measured and powerful, sending waves of mental command to the human assault teams. When a Dran pressed a hand to a steel wall, a frigid blast propagated through the mortar, loosening debris and sending up clouds of noxious dust. Inhaling the tainted particles, the Grax bodies sagged, minds unbalanced, unable to coordinate any counterattack. While the corridors still thundered with weapon fire, Chin and Trill's combined telepathy coalesced into a psychic storm. Grax RS howled in agony as their flesh felt rent by invisible blades, their screams echoing down every hallway. Human soldiers seized the moment of chaos, crouching at tunnel junctions and firing plasma bursts directly into enemy skulls and torsos. Gore and brain matter sprayed the walls like gruesome splatter art. As night fell over the module, Operation Mindstorm reached its crescendo. Trillspent and trembling opened his eyes and whispered, "Finish it." Ortega nodded, her voice amplified over the comms. "All units, full assault. Eliminate every last foe." The bunker labyrinth transformed into a death maze. Grax RS were herded into dead ends and systematically wiped out. Charred, fragmented corpses piled up, reeking of burnt plasma, stacked neatly as target practice for the survivors. At last, when the subterranean thunder subsided, no American relief force had yet arrived. But by harnessing the power of their minds, the defenders of Andromeda 7 had delivered the Grax RS their first and possibly final death sentence. Trill collapsed, feathers wilting, as Chin gently laid a hand on his shoulder and murmured, "We did it. Now we hold the line and wait for our true allies." In the weary yet resolute eyes of every warrior, faith in their psychic bonding in themselves blazed fiercely onward. Operation Scorpion. In the damp darkness of the underground maze, Colonel Ortega whispered over the radio, "Initiate Operation Scorpion." 6 human and concordant special ops teams readied themselves for an ambush, arrayed in spearhead, pincer, and hammer formations to strike without warning. No one spoke superfluous words, only cold glances and decisive movements. Each footfall was measured to avoid the Grax's thermal mines laid throughout the corridors. Vorton guards affixed vibration sensors to the tunnel walls, capturing the Grax marching rhythms and relaying the data back to command. Miri and Trill monitored the enemy's mental waves via the telepathy module, pinpointing the moment the Grax let down their guard while prying open ventilation shafts. Miri's clipped voice crackled through the comms. 30 Grax up ahead. They're focused on the vent breach. Strike now." The signal was flawless. At the C7 intersection, Shadow Team and the Strike Squad pressed themselves into the steel walls. Infrared spotlights recorded the Grax silhouettes creeping into view. Rifles lowered to a whisper, a single flash from the Orion device, then silence. The Grax never saw their motion trackers go dark. With one command, 6 operatives squeezed triggers, unleashing a deafening volley of plasma rounds that shredded armor and flesh, sending chunks of Grax meat flying against the corridor walls. Blood splattered in a macabre tapestry of mechanized hell. The crack of bone and the Grax's agonized screams echoed down the tunnel. Not a single enemy managed a coordinated response. They thrashed in brutal shock before collapsing. Dran telepath Korin emitted a psychic pulse that spun the Grax minds into vertigo, confused, disoriented, unable to find an exit. The corridor quickly became a crimson-stained graveyard, gore splashing onto boots and weapons alike. The initial success electrified the ambush teams, but Ortega forbade celebration. She issued the next orders. Move swiftly toward Machine Room B2. Split teams A and Bavoid, vibration mine sectors. The squads withdrew into a tighter formation, low and silent like specters slipping through smoke. As they advanced, they emplaced thermal mines at the left, junction-ready traps for incoming Grax reinforcements. 3 minutes later, the first mine detonated with a thunderclap. A crater yawned open, swallowing more than 20 Grax who had charged down the side passage. Dust and debris clouded vision. Through the haze, human squads surged forward, finishing the survivors with bursts of electroshock fire. Some Grax burned black, flesh contracting until they fused against the tunnel walls. Back at command, Zilla watched the drone feed monitors with taut expression. Golden window. Sacrificing C5 is critical. Young Vorton Lieutenant Diaz nodded, loading an anti-tank rocket into his launcher. He rammed the sealed hatch, firing the rocket to blast the hinges apart. The Grax swarmed in with claws outstretched, but Diaz's wall-buried mine detonated as soon as he slipped inside, flinging half a dozen clunky bodies into a support pillar. Operation Scorpion's genius lay in its double-bait tactic. Miri tweaked the oxygen regeneration module to lull the Grax into a false sense of security as they funneled into Section A, then flooded them with psychic terror to rip apart their cohesion. Human fighters deployed drone-launched cluster grenades into the concentrated Grax pocket, triggering a black smoke rainbow blast that collapsed secondary vents. Cut off from each other, the Grax misfired on their own allies and descended into chaotic melee. The carnage peaked as a mobile field medic team moved among the bodies to prevent biological contamination. Grax roars of resistance mixed with gurgling cries as crushed lungs exploded filled the air. Someone pounded a bulkhead shouting, "Rescue is on its way!" But the Grax no longer heard pleas. They only had the instinct to survive at any cost. Finally, after more than 40 harrowing minutes, Operation Scorpion drew to a triumphant pause. Over 200 Grax RS were neutralized, and a sizable section of the bunker was liberated. Medical teams set up triage stations, and the shrill calls for aid echoed through the labyrinth, tearing through the silence left by slaughter. Ortega strode into Machine Room B2, surveying the tired yet proud faces of her soldiers. Enemy blood crusted their armor, and dirt clung to every crevice, but their eyes shone with fierce conviction. She delivered her verdict in a single sentence. "We've shown our fangs. Scorpion succeeded. Hold this ground and await reinforcements." The maintenance lights flickered on, illuminating the crimson stains on the concrete floor like a vow of unwavering combat. In that rare moment of calm, everyone understood that Operation Scorpion was more than an ambush, it was a declaration. If the Grax RS thought they could crush humanity, humanity would turn the tunnels into a deadly trap. It was a decisive step forward, laying the groundwork for the final victory yet to come. Operation Trojan, an ultra-brief signal, barely a millisecond long slice through the Grax RS firewall and triggered Operation Trojan. Deep in the underground base, Colonel Ortega raised a gloved hand and whispered over her mic, "Deploy the Hydra virus." Instantly, the command console blinked out the message. Hydra deployed. Network compromised. Grax RS comms lit up in static. Their alarm klaxons screeched and then fell eerily silent. Radar screens lost all contacts. Red blips on the tactical map flickered out into indistinct black blobs. Every Grax command channel went dark, forcing their commanders to resort to hand signals, throwing the entire complex into panic chaos. Shadow Team 6 human operatives in adaptive stealth, armor slipped into the main Grax control room. They planted micro-EMP charges on critical control circuits and detonated them in rapid succession. Blue arcs of electricity snapped through the air, smelling of ozone and burning circuitry. The ancient Grax power grid collapsed entirely. Flying turrets sputtered to a halt mid-swoop, and Gatling guns froze in mid-fire, leaving only a deathly hush. At the same time, Major Sora's Dran unit installed mobile signal relay modules, amplifying the Hydra virus through every repeater station. Back in the command tent, Miri and Trill monitored the Grax brainwave patterns via the telepathy module and watched as pulse rates slowed and fear flooded their minds. They issued the go-ahead. Enemy network fully disoriented. Begin full assault. Immediately, every ambush team abandoned concealment and materialized up and down the passages without warning. Panicked Grax's footsteps thundered as they desperately tried to re-establish their network, only to be met with endless 404 not found errors across their consoles. On the map, red dots went dark, then vanished altogether. A Grax commander snarled and raked his claws at the blank screen, but his growl devolved into mute static. In the maelstrom, Captain Reed of Shadow Team tracked the corrupted data streams and confirmed that all primary control nodes were offline. They advanced to the central command console, plasma fire streaking across the walls. Grax blood splattered optics and grip rails. Bodies littered the floor like fallen pillars. Miniature proximity mines affixed to the hatch detonated in a cascade of shrapnel, peppering the ceiling in a lethal electro rain. Vorton units in the lower bunker immediately activated the emergency override schematic loaded by the virus, rerouting medical teams and anti-air batteries. Sirens blared as Dran engineers wheeled in portable oxygen scrubbers to contaminated sections. Simultaneously, they erected data firewalls to prevent any Hydra spillback into the base's own life support systems. Miri exhaled sharply, eyes alight. "We've neutralized their neural core. Hold your lines and await further orders." Outside, the heavy blast doors slid open, revealing an ashen, torchlit atrium. Exhausted but proud, the troops shouldered their rifles and stepped into the artificial daylight. No cheers rang out, just grim nods exchanged among warriors. Every footprint pressed into the cracked concrete bore the mark of dried enemy blood. From above, the first medical pods and support modules began to descend. The roar of servo motors heralded the imminent arrival of reinforcements. Ortega caught Zilla's gaze through the telepathy link, and their thoughts aligned. Operation Trojan is complete. We have broken their network. The entire force bowed their heads in quiet relief. Through the hatch frame, silent drop pods continued to fall. Latin-named engineers hurriedly assembled casualty tracking stations, calibrated oxygen sensors, and coordinated strategic reserves. While waiting for fresh troops and gear, they fortified their defense-ceasing Hydra itself to monitor any Grax attempts at network restoration. Every false command or rogue packet from the enemy triggered an automatic countermeasure. A sudden burst of Grax rifle fire rang out as a raiding party tried to breach a secondary bulkhead, unaware that it was rigged with cluster EMP traps. When they charged in, circuits fried with a high-pitched buzz, and Grax bodies slammed into walls, sending up plumes of burning dust. Miri allowed herself a slight smile. "We've got this battlefield locked down," Zilla replied in her mind. No path to victory remains for them. As the first dawn shafts pierced the bunker gloom, Operation Trojan closed like an irreversible verdict. The Grax Arsant's confident masters of every system now found themselves crippled and silent. Though battle-worn, the people of Andromeda 7 stood resolute, steeling themselves for the final confrontation. This was only the opening salvo of the slaughter. They had planned dawn that would haunt any foe foolish enough to hear the name human. The decisive strike of the mining fleet. The 1,000-ton mining vessels designed to bore through planetary crust snow loomed like uncanny war machines, silently descending through Andromeda 7's atmosphere. Their hulks bore a rough industrial look. Battered hulls scarred by battle, massive caterpillar treads instead of jet engines, and smokestacks belching dense black plumes. Beneath layers of dust-gray paint, high-velocity rotary cannons and laser emitters were welded into the drill assemblies, disguised as pressure release valves and fuel injectors. At the signal, their engines roared to life, and the thermal drill treads gouged trench after trench through the ground, carving a direct path into the Grax stronghold. In the command center, Ortega raised her hand in salute. "Decisive strike mining, vessel gambit, commence." Her voice boomed through the loudspeakers and crackled across every radio channel, igniting a surge of adrenaline among the troops. Low-flying surveillance drones swept the perimeter with infrared scans, instantly mapping Grax clusters around the reactor core and toxin depots. The three-dimensional holographic display blinked red at key coordinate targets to be neutralized before the enemy could react. 6 massive mining vessels rolled forward in formation, their treads pulverizing debris and forging a tunnel straight through the enemy bastion. At each bow, twin Gatling plasma cannons unleashed tremor-shaking volleys that shattered reinforced concrete barriers. The Grax panicked, scrambling in every direction, claws ripping open the air, but too late to bring their weapons to bear. The high-pitched whine of plasma ripping through flesh echoed across the battlefield as Grax bodies were pulverized or incinerated into ash. In the civilian sector, Vorten and Maloyan refugees huddled in shelters, hearts pounding at the thunderous growl of steel treads nearby. Ortega's urgent broadcast cut through the fear. Prepare to engage any remaining hostiles. These are armored rock drills, no quarter given. A choked cheer rose from the crowd as they clasped hands and shouted, "For Andromeda!" Their unified roar lent strength to the operation. The rotating drill assemblies spun at blistering speed, ripping through Grax blast doors and spraying molten sparks, opening a gate of hell at the spearhead of the flotilla. Amid the thunderous booms and choking dust, Shadow Team led the charge. Instead of rifles, they wielded remote detonator primers for kilometers of thermal mine lines pre-laid around the complex. At their command, clusters of buried mines detonated in simultaneous bursts, encircling and incinerating Grax pockets in ring after ring of fire. Shrapnel cascaded through the tunnels, skulls fractured, bone fragments raining down amidst the screams and the roar of burning flesh, a macabre symphony of death. The Grax Supreme Commander refused to be outdone and unleashed high-energy cannon fire and counterattack. But the shells veered wildly, victims of the Trojan virus, crippling their fire control network and detonated inside their own decks. Blue flashes of back EMF shorted out power conduits, triggering secondary explosions in turret arrays. One massive cannon barrel was flung free in a plume of smoke, skidding across the floor and nearly crushing an evacuation convoy. Zilla watched the internal satellite feeds with trembling hand. He realized he was witnessing history. For the first time, humanity has turned mining rigs into weapons of annihilation, he whispered to himself. At the same moment, mobile med units raced into safe zones, attending to the lightly wounded with immediate field care. The air stung with fresh blood and burning metal, yet every mind remained razor-sharp, a potent mix of horror and exhilaration. When the concrete blast walls finally collapsed, revealing the main corridor to the reactor vault, Ortega barked the order, "All units advance." The mining vessels thundered forward, ramming through the final gate. Their treads crushed the Grax anti-air emplacement, then ground to a halt at the balcony overlooking the reactor chamber. Through the gaping aperture, engineers scrambled in to plant thermal charges in the core, preparing for the Bombardier Pass. The final detonation sequence. Ortega's low roar echoed across the comms. "No retreat!" From the telepathy module, Trill and Chin unleashed a psychic wave that engulfed the remaining Grax in paralyzing dread. They stood frozen in shattered rubble, eyes wide with terror, as countdown beacons on the charges flickered. 1, 2, 3. A cataclysmic blast shook the ground, the reactor's protective dome exploding outward in a blinding supernova of light like doomsday fireworks. Smoke and dust choked every corridor. As the haze cleared, the mining vessels stood sentry, their treads still stained with dried blood. Inside the command chamber, human officers embraced, tears mingling with sweat. They had fused the brute force of industry with the power of the mind, turning their final assault into the defining blow. The Grax RS were utterly broken. Andromeda 7 had not only survived but had etched its name into the annals of galactic warfare. Industrial might. Amid choking smoke and swirling ash, industrial might became Andromeda 7's cruelest weapon. The 1,000-ton mining machine swans, used only for coal extraction, had been refitted with high-output plasma sprayers and super-pressure drilling cannons. Their massive steel treads crushed every obstacle in their path, while drill heads spinning at thousands of RPM sliced through Grax armor as effortlessly as a scalpel through butter. The deafening roar of engines like funeral bells echoed through the corridors, painting a nightmarish battlefield. Clad in heavy armor and dust filtration masks, the industrial engineers operated each machine with shocking precision. They didn't simply bore holes, they carved mechanical scars into the enemy's defenses. Each burst of plasma hissed like a viper strike, melting through thick alloy plates and incinerating energy glass, sending Grax warriors sprawling in stunned defeat. The sickening symphony of flesh and metal fusing together created the grim soundtrack of a mechanical hell, causing even the bravest to cringe. When the laser drill units powered up, their icy blue beams gouged perfect trenches through Grax plating, leaving two shimmering furrows like open wounds. The intense heat vaporized surface layers, filling the air with acrid fumes of synthetic resin and molten metal. One Grax soldier lunged to parry the beam with its claws, but in an instant, it was reduced to ash. Metal fragments rained down, striking nearby troops and triggering a catastrophic domino effect. Andromeda 7 didn't stop at drills and lasers. They transformed bulldozers into colossal war engines. Steel plow blades bristling with spike bolts tore through reinforced walls, while drill masts detonated embedded charges to blast Grax platoons back against tunnel walls. As the treads pulverized the concrete floor, the surface split open into a smoking abyss. Grax troops panicked, some tumbling into the chasm below, their bodies crushed under the weight of falling debris. The pièce de résistance was the roller shield, a 30-ton steel drum that rolled through defensive barriers, flattening every foe beneath it. The metallic groan of its surface grinding against armor joined with the Grax's terrified screams, and crimson arcs splattered across observation ports, obscuring sightlines in a grisly spectacle. As it churned onward, the corridor became a river of bodies, an inconceivable tableau of mourning. Meanwhile, civilian volunteers were pressed into industrial militias. Wielding power hammers to sever support cables, they detonated Zephyr Charges cluster bombs hidden in fuel lines only. When Grax forces advanced into kill zone, the thunderous explosion sent concrete shrapnel flying and knocked swathes of enemies into walls. The mingled scents of fuel and burning flesh underscored the mechanized tragedy. In the control hub, technicians monitored heat and pressure data on live displays. Whenever a Grax shell overheated, the dashboard flashed "Overheat," signaling assault teams to target the weakened armor. LED alarms cast flickering green and red, glows over soldiers' faces ashen, with stress one moment, flushed with the thrill of ruthless victory the next. Industrial Might's terror extended beyond its weapon set, became a psychological juggernaut. The sight of gargantuan machines roaring and grinding corpses instilled a horrific dread in the Grax hive mind. Through Trill's telepathic link, waves of panic and despair rippled across the enemy network. "We are not hunters, we are the hunted." That fear spread like a contagion, driving Grax units to turn on one another in frenzied chaos. As the industrial onslaught peaked, Dran-deployed mine clearance bots sprang into action. Remote-triggered vibration charges detonated along support arches, collapsing entire guard enclaves before the Grax even realized they were under attack. The last vestiges of hope evaporated, leaving only a wasteland of empty armor and shattered minds. Finally, as the first rays of dawn pierced the ruin, Andromeda 7 had liberated a vast swath of tunnels. The mining drills and dozers ground to a halt, their treads still spattered with dried blood. Crews moved quickly to clear the stabilizing ash and rubble so civilians could return. Although the veins of the complex had been soaked red and the echoes of mechanized inferno lingered, Industrial Might had proven more than a destroyer. It was the emblem of extraordinary survival and an unyielding will to triumph. The final battle for the reactor. The reactor's protective chamber trembled like the gates of hell. Blood-red emergency lights flickered against spiderweb cracks etched into the thick concrete walls. The acrid stench of chlorine and ammonia mixed with burning fuel oil, forming a choking haze that stole every breath. Warning sirens pulsed in frantic bursts, signaling that internal pressure in the fusion trigger was nearing a catastrophic threshold. Even the proud, ruthless Grax RS recoiled in terror at the prospect of a single blast that could end life on this world. Colonel Ortega gripped her headset microphone, her voice resonant and unyielding. Delta Team, prepare to breach the reactor core. Gamma Team, secure the left flank. Epsilon Team, lock down the right flank. No Grax will slip through. Behind her, the hydraulic rattle of heavy doors and alarm klaxons filled every corridor. Each soldier could feel life hanging by a thread as tightly as the strain on the warhead's locking clamps. Commander Zilla knelt beside the pressure-regulating panel, his 3 hearts counting every millisecond. The gauge pinned at 95% of critical detonation pressure. He looked up at the monitor. We have 6 minutes before meltdown. Engage emergency vent override if we can reclaim control of the primary valve. Blood and grime stained Miri's once pristine armor, but she nodded fiercely, her eyes gleaming with resolve. At Trill's signal, the Maloyan elder pressed his resonant staff to the chamber's wall, unleashing a wave of psychic energy through the concrete. A chorus of anguished Grax screams erupted as hundreds of gun-bearing warriors raised their plasma rifles in sudden, paralyzing fear. That was the moment Delta Team struck. In less than 3 seconds, 6 humans armed with plasma rifles and EMP drones leveled their weapons at the 1-meter steel blast door and blew it wide open. The corridor exploded in searing light. Plasma discharges roared as they tore through the remaining armor plates. Grax blood sprayed the thermal vision lenses, igniting in bright red sparks. Armored fragments and shattered safety glass rained down, filling the chamber with choking smoke and the metallic tang of incinerated flesh. The scene was a macabre ballet of destruction, both brutal and mesmerizing. White steam billowed from the reactor's cylindrical casing, as though the machine itself exhaled its final gasping breath. Gamma and Epsilon teams repelled every counterattack from the flanks. They had wired vibration mines along the fuel conduits, poised for the next detonation wave. When the Grax charged those alleys of fire, the buried explosives detonated in synchronized fury, tearing dozens of warriors limb from limb. The thunderous bangs blended with anguish Rorsan inferno of death echoing through steel corridors. Back in the control hub, Miri and Zilla worked in tandem. Miri's fingers flew across the valve control console, initiating the emergency disarm sequence. Zilla read the technical prompts aloud. Set parameter H. Lock 4 sequential valves. Parameter Ione, Puthri, Exioni, Long 2. Open the liquid, nitrogen vents. Parameter Ds. Redirect excess pressure to containment chambers. Each keystroke was as precise as a surgeon's incision. Fractions of a second spelled the difference between salvation and apocalypse. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Chen and the Dran telepaths gathered at the MindLink module, channeling every ounce of psychic might. They flooded the Grax Supreme Commander's consciousness with disorienting pulses, slowing its thoughts and dissolving spatial awareness. When Chen uttered the mental command, "Release," the disarmament wave crystallized into a psychic tempest that knocked every Grax soldier unconscious before they even fired a shot. Moments later, the valve room door swung open under the force of human will. Ortega sprinted across the ruined hatchway, wielding a high-pressure plasma drill as her final tool. The spinning cutter shrieked like a banshee as it chewed through the valve's armored housing, shredding the last layer of protection. She quickly set the demolition module against the valve steam kill switch, ready to trigger a reverse containment implosion if needed. "If we can't stabilize the valve," she muttered, "we're all done for." Behind her, Grax survivors lunged in desperation, but their weapons discharged into empty air. In the critical moment, Miri slammed her palm on the override panel. "Activate emergency vent!" The console's lights shifted from blood red to emerald green. The main valve disengaged, allowing the superheated plasma and excess fusion byproducts to vent safely into cooling arrays. The reactor's roaring pressure subsided into a steady hiss as white-hot waste flashed into secondary chambers, transforming imminent disaster into brilliant, blinding light. Sirens fell silent, replaced by the steady clank of safety locks engaging. As the final confirmation message glowed on the display, "System safe the bunker" erupted in applause that reverberated like a victory salute. Ortega exhaled, her armor soaked in sweat and Grax blood. Zilla wrapped her in a fierce embrace, tears glinting in his 3 crimson eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "Humanity has prevailed." Miri dropped to one knee, wiping a tear from her mask. "At too great a cost," she replied, voice choked. Nearby, medical teams surged forward, administering triage and urgent care to the wounded. IV drips and plasma transfusions hummed as life support machines steadied trembling breaths. Trill placed a gentle hand on each survivor, sending soothing telepathic reassurances. "You are alive. We have triumphed." Under the harsh glow of emergency lamps, faces once etched with dread now reflected relief and an unbreakable spark of hope. In the stunned silence that followed, the reactor chamberants, mere moments from obliteration, stood as a monument to improbable survival. Huddled side by side, the humans, Vortons, Maloyans, and Drans surveyed the carnage. Corridors stained red with Grax remains, machinery scorched, and the acrid atmosphere finally clearing. They had faced utter annihilation and emerged victorious. In every warrior's eyes burned the same steadfast conviction: Andromeda 7 would endure. And from this crucible of fire, they would forge a new legacy among the stars. The psychic counterstrike. After the industrial onslaught subsided, the pitch-black tunnels fell into a deathly silence. In mere moments, that stillness was shattered by the ragged breathing of Grax RS troops struggling to regroup. Colonel Ortega's voice cut through the darkness. "Begin the psychic counterstrike Operation Astral Storm." The holoprojector flared blood, red with the declaration, marking the campaign's final turning point. Trill, the Maloyan elder, settled amid a circle of 6 Dran, his resonant staff planted on the cold floor. His eyes closed as a violet aura pulsed from his temples, sending tremors through the comm antenna. He unleashed the first psychic wave into the Grax hive mind, sowing seeds of panic. "You are isolated. Your neural rhythms are off, kilter. No one will save you." Lieutenant Kira Chen, wearing her homemade neural amplifier, broadcast and magnified Trill's telepathic assault. "They're hearing the screams of fallen comrades, feeling the warmth of blood spilled," she intoned. That invisible current of terror seeped into every Grax mind, plunging them into a collective massacre hallucination. Each saw themselves surrounded by slaughter, their own kin turning on them in frenzied betrayal. Instantly, Captain Reed swept his recon squad into action. In a heartbeat, 6 ambush teams burst from hidden alcoves, plasma rifles blazing and heavy grenades arcing through the gloom. Their volleys tore through the disoriented Grax ranks. Plasma rounds punched holes in weakened armor, molten shards spraying across thermal vision scopes. Grax shrieks and the crackle of burning exoskeletons commingled in a merciless uproar. Behind the firefight, Vorton units deployed heavy ordnance shrapnel launchers hammered into the stunned Grax horde, now frozen in psychic horror. Each plasma burst incinerated flesh and armor alike, scattering clumps of ash across the deck. The detonations rang like blood-soaked fireworks, painting the corridor in streaks of crimson and echoes of dread. Meanwhile, Miri led the telepathy squad in a focused assault on the Grax Supreme Commander. By modulating psychic frequencies, they forced its consciousness to glimpse a universe kneeling before humanity. The shockwave of that revelation ignited the commander's exoskeleton from within. Its roar of rage dissolved into a feeble rasp band, then silence. One final plasma beep spat from its rifle before its broken mind shattered into inert ruin. Ortega seized the moment. She vaulted forward, plasma blade drawn, and slashed through the reinforced blast door into the nerve center. In one savage arc, her blade carved through steel plating and severed the Grax mental control node. The creature collapsed, brains splattering across the concrete in a grotesque spray of gore and gore-tinged smoke. Above, a hover drone drifted in to release its EMP disk, disabling every remaining life support system. The Grax, their sensor arrays fried, stumbled in stunned confusion as door clamps released with a metallic snap, signifying their final inability to resist. When the chaos finally ebbed, Trill lowered his staff and exhaled. With one last telepathic wave, he imparted calm reassurance to every allied soldier. Breathe deeply. We have conquered their minds. Vorton and Dran medics hurried forth to clear the tunnels of Grax's corpses and tend to the wounded, readying for the recovery phase. The bunker fell into an eerie hush. Emergency lights shifted from blood red to soft green, a signal of hope reborn. Amid the dust and shattered armor, Human, Vorton, Maloyan, and Dran embraced one another, tears mingling with sweat and blood streaks. They had executed the psychic Counter-Strikean unprecedented fusion of telepathy and firepower that utterly broke the enemy's will. Commander Zilla stepped forward, his three hearts pulsing in quiet harmony. We have avenged our world, but the war continues. Miri placed a hand on his shoulder, sending a warm telepathic message. We are never alone. Our alliance endures. In that moment, within the scarred halls of Andromeda 7, the unbreakable spirit of survival and solidarity shone brighter than any weapon heralding the next chapter of their galactic struggle. Aftermath and the future. When the final all-clear siren fell silent, the bunker sank into a grave-like hush. Dust and debris lay strewn through every corridor, mingled with crusted streaks of dried blood. Emergency lights gradually shifted from ominous red to a soft, hopeful green, illuminating the network of fissures that scarred the concrete wall-silent witnesses to the fierce ordeal that had just ended. Colonel Maya Ortega stood alone in the command center, her chest heaving with the echo of her own heartbeat. She spoke quietly into her microphone. All operations concluded. Begin after-action report. Within 5 tense minutes, Commander Zilla and Captain Miri had compiled the grim statistics. Among the Concordat forces, Vorton, Maloyan, and Drantha, toll was 1, 200 souls lost, and 3, 400 severely wounded. The bunker's structural damage was estimated at 65%, with collapsed corridors and shattered support pillars. Human casualties numbered 950, 2 mining vessels irreparably destroyed, and 4 drop pods unaccounted for. Though the losses were staggering, Andromeda 7's defenders had survived the Grax RS Cataclysma fight that would determine the fate of their world. In the cramped medbay alcoves, field surgeons and drawn triage specialists sprang into action. Intravenous pumps hissed and clanked as life-saving fluids coursed into battered limbs. Dran engineers fine-tuned pressure regulators to stabilize those suffering cardiac collapse, while Vorton medics improvised lightweight alloy prosthetics for the amputees. The drum of metal trays and the rustle of medkits created a frantic soundtrack of survival. A Dran nurse wiped a tear from her cheek as she bandaged a wounded comrade, whispering to herself, "We crossed the threshold of hell and we still breathe." Elder Trill shuffled through rows of recovery cots, placing gentle hands on the foreheads of those suffering psychological shock. His telepathic lullabies soothed frayed nerves, gently guiding minds back from the brink. With each healing gesture, he felt echoes of Earth's ancient wars reverberate through his staff reminders of countless sacrifices recorded in cosmic memory. He murmured, "We have learned that united, machinery, weaponry, and spirit form an unbreakable shield." Colonel Ortega stepped outside the blast doors into a gray skyscape choked with smoke. Beyond the threshold, Dran reconnaissance teams swept through ventilation shafts, releasing neutralizing agents to cleanse the air. Vorton engineers reset mobile solar modules to restore power across the bunker grid. Figures in power armor moved among the ruin, reigniting generators and stringing fresh conduits every action, a pulse of renewed hope. Zilla's comlink crackled to life with incoming Concordat dispatches. The humanitarian fleet would arrive in 3 hours, bearing medical supplies, rations, and infrastructure, restoration tools. He allowed himself a weary smile as relief filled his 3 hearts. Andromeda 7 will not remain a ruin, he declared. The Concordat's vow to its ally is unbreakable. Miri replied, "We saved ourselves, but we cannot rebuild alone." In the civilian enclave, orphan Vorton and Dran children gathered at a provisional daycare center, where Maloyan volunteers read gentle stories by lamplight. Their soft laughter mingled with the distant hum of supply transports, a tender counterpoint to the earlier roar of war. Nearby, Dran youths meticulously rewired emergency lights, soldering fragile connectors with careful hand. Though exhausted, they welded each joint with a solemn pride, determined that those lamps would beat back the darkness. Elder Trill convened a War Council briefing with Ortega, Zilla, the Chief Medical Officer, and Head Engineer. A star map of Andromeda 7 glowed on the holoscreen, highlighting blasted fields of wrecked vent shafts and fractured reactor vanes. Trill opened. "We have won this pivotal clash, but our world remains wounded. Rebuilding our infrastructure and fortifying our spiritual bonds are as vital as this victory." Ortega outlined the long-term recovery plan: immediate restoration of air filtration systems and medical facilities, phased reconstruction of civilian habitat schools and infirmaries among the manned concurrent militia training to deter future incursions. Zilla added, "We shall invite Earth and Concordate specialists to ensure this planet never falls prey again." The meeting closed with Trill's measured knock on the conference table. "From this day forward, Andromeda 7 will stand not only as a survivor, but as a fortress of our alliance." A wave of determined nods swept the room. In that moment, each leader battle, scarred yet unbowed, felt the same buoyant surge of resolve. Amid the rubble of the underground stronghold, the seeds of rebuilding had taken root. Humans, Vortons, Maloyan, and Dran stood shoulder to shoulder, wary but unwavering. The machinery of war lay silent now, but the machinery of hope was already turning. From the ashes of the final reactor, stand to the dawn of this new alliance, Andromeda 7's story would be one of unity, resilience, and an unyielding will to protect life across the stars.